Hello, I'm Kama Ross. I serve as the District Forester for the Leelanau, Benzie, and Grand Traverse Conservation Districts. And spring tree planting is upon us. And with COVID, we're not going to be able to interact as much when you pick up your seedlings from the districts in a week or two. So I thought this video might give you some more tips that might help you enjoy a little more success with the survival rate of the seedlings that you've invested in. So I'm just going to show you a few things. Arbor Day is on Friday, April 24th, and you know, Arbor Day's been around since the 1874, I believe. A huge connection with Michigan. J. Sterling Morton was a Michigan native. You might think of Morton Salt or the Morton Arboretum in Chicago, my hometown, but he was a Michigan native, and he started this in Nebraska because he really loved trees, and I'm guessing you're right there with him because this is a great year to get out and plant trees. Hope you're out there with family members safely, getting the kids out to learn how to plant trees right alongside with you. So a couple of the tools I have behind me that you might have available. I do have a really kind of a fun one, but that's called a dibble behind me, and that's a forestry tool from way back, and you don't have to have a dibble, but you can rent one from the Leelanau Conservation District or all the conservation districts. So the first thing to remember is that when you receive your seedlings on the designated day, you're going to want to keep them cool and moist and in the dark until you plant them, up to the moment you plant them. So today is an overcast day. It's about 38 degrees, really quite cold out here, but if you're uncomfortable, know that the tree seedlings are gonna be happy and have a better chance. So you're going to want to keep them wrapped up so that they don't dry out. So they're going to come in paper, which I didn't have at home, but you're going to want to keep them, moist and covered in dirt or in the shredded paper that they should become packaged in from your place. The other way that you can store seedlings right before you plant them is what's called TerraSorb, and it's a soil moisturizer that helps coat the root system and protect them while you're planting. So I've put about an ounce in my bucket with it's about half full. And then as I pull this out, you'll notice there's this gel that's covering the root system. And what that does is while I'm planting this tree, it's going to protect it from drying out from the wind, from the sun, and just give that a little extra boost. The other thing is once it's in the ground, there is research that shows that it can draw moisture from the surrounding area. And so for those first 2 years where moisture is just critical for seedling success, the TerraSorb might give you just a little added security, especially if you're planning on really sandy soils like I have here. But actually the research is not 100%, so think about it, and if you want to do it, it's I think 3 ounces for $4 or something, really affordable. But again, it does coat those seedlings and maybe help protect them. The one thing I do want you not to do, and people have been doing this for years, don't just put them in a bucket of water, just plain water. What you're doing at that point is that the seedlings the root systems are covered in a bunch of soil, and those little tiny root hairs that we can't even see need to be protected, and that soil is what's protecting them. If you don't use TerraSorb, keep the soil as much intact as possible, but please don't put it in a bucket of water because that just washes off all that good soil and all those maybe microbes that you want to add to your planting hole and its home. The other thing you're going to want to do, and I tend to do this beforehand because it's hard for me to do everything in one day. I prepare the planting sites. I usually put a flag to mark the areas, so I in advance think about laying out the right site for the species that I've chosen for the right purpose. And today I'm planting along a woodlot edge. Behind me are all maple trees, so I'm trying to add diversity of the species, and I'm on the edge because I'm going to get a little sunlight, which these species are going to need to be successful. And then I'm also adding a lot of diversity where the wildlife tend to go, which is between one forest cover type and then maybe an open field, which is behind you and you can't see. So if I increase the diversity, the structural with shrubs and different types of species, I'm going to attract songbirds and small mammals, hopefully not the deer, to my area, which is one of the reasons why I'm planting today. The two species, or a couple species that I'm using are serviceberry, which is a native shrub that's just about ready to start doing its thing. It's one of the first ones that bloom and has a beautiful, lovely white flower. Serviceberry along the edge, and I'm also doing a white pine and northern white cedar. So good species that can take a little bit of shade, but along the edge they'll get enough where I feel like they'll be successful. Okay, so I've got the right trees picked. I went to the conservation districts. I know the source is good. I picked the right site, sandy soils. All these match my sandy soils. Good species for that. And then for the right reason, I want to increase biodiversity, mainly to attract songbirds and small mammals to my property, in my backyard. Okay, I've marked the area, and I've actually done a little work in advance because, again, it's a little too much work to get it all done. Once I've marked the area with where I want to plant the trees, I'm doing what's called scalping, and that is just clearing out about 1 foot to 2 foot around diameter hole, and I go about 2 to 4 inches, and I'm taking off all the root systems that are in that area. So I'm getting down just to soil, mineral soil, and releasing that competition from the planting site. Again, that's critical. If you have existing root systems that are going to compete with this brand new root system on the seedling that you're introducing, the seedling is going to lose because it's the grasses and weeds or whatever you got growing is well established, and they're going to suck all the moisture out come July and August, pretty much for the first 2 years. So I've prepared this site, and I'm going to plant my white pine, which has been in my pterosorb. And again, I'm going to double check and see how long the roots are. And this has a pretty nice root system, so I'm going to make sure that if I do want to plant this with the entire root system intact the way it is, I want to make sure the depth of the hole is going to match that height, so I don't do what's called J-rooting, or bunching up the roots in the bottom of the hole, or maybe doing a bunch of swirly things, because whatever direction these ends of these roots are facing is the direction that they will continue to grow for the rest of their life. So too often times we don't dig a deep enough hole and we just jam the roots in there, and they do that J or that ball, or they just kind of wrap around each other, and eventually they'll constrict. The root systems will constrict because of that bend and die, and so you've lost the ability for those roots to do what they need to do. So I'm going to double check. I'm going to use my planting bar, which is this forestry tool called a dibble, and it's a really heavy tool with a nice handle and places for your foot to go. But I want to make sure that the length of my roots matches the depth of my dibble or my planting bar, or the shovel, a flat shovel that you'll be using, or a shovel if you're going to dig a hole. I'm going to look for the root collar, which is where there's a swelling, and that distinguishes the root system from the stem of the tree. And it's really important to hit that as close to the mark as possible. If you go too deep and you bury some of the stem under the dirt in your hole, you're going to put a stress on the tree. If you go too narrow and you have this root area sticking out, it's going to also put a stress and dry out those roots. So you really want to match that root collar right back to where it was growing in the nursery, so that the soil is right here. So I'm going to hold it up, and of course I would have done this in advance, but I wanted to show you this. So my root is a little bit longer, so I have a choice. Either I have to dig my hole deeper to make sure that that end of that root tip is facing down, not all bunched up, or I may decide that I have 100 of these and I'm not going to dig that many deep holes, so I may trim them off. It will depend on the size of your project and the amount of helpers you have and how much energy you have. I think in this situation, I'm going to try to get my planting bar a little bit down, because I love those roots right there. They've got a nice fibrous area down there, and I'd hate to lose that. So I'm going to put that back in the pterosorb just for a second, and I'm going to show you how I dig hopefully you can see that. this is my area that's been cleared, and it's about 18 inches across, I think. So I'm going to plant with a dibble and show you how to do that. Or again, a flat shovel will work just as well. You know, it'll dig just about, and it's the same length hole it will dig. So what you're going to do is you're going to want to just open up the area by pressing this down as far. And again, remember, I had a couple of inches I had to go further, so I'm actually going below the surface. And then I'm just going to create a V-shaped hole by going back and forth with my straight shovel or my planting bar. And I've got a really nice V-shaped hole that'll fit these just perfectly. I'm going to take this out and put it down. I'm going to reach in my bucket, and again, one at a time. Tons of nice pterosorb on that root system, which makes me really happy. And I'm going to carefully feed it down into the hole, the root system. And it's kind of hard to stick your hand in the hole, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down as far as I can, and then I'm going to pull it back up to where that root collar is exactly at the level of where the ground stops. So, you know, it's kind of nice to have a friend help you as you're getting going, but after a few of these, you'll catch on really well. To close that hole, and that's so important because you want really good connection between the soil and the roots. If there's an air hole between your roots and the soil, those roots can't absorb any of the water and they'll dry out. So we really have to close up that hole in order for that connection to be solid. So I'm going to put my planting bar or my straight shovel back in the hole about 2 or 3 inches on my side of the hole, and I'm just going to press down again as far down as I was before, and then I'm just going to push on it. And what I'm doing is I'm closing that hole. Just closed up that V really nice. And I'm going to double check that I've got it just at the root collar, which I do. And so I'm going to put some dirt back. Oh, I didn't have my shovel on. Oh, the other thing I want to remind you about is that in the planting hole on these sandy sites, you really might want to consider an amendment. And that might be compost. I personally went to my neighborhood compost producer in Maple City, and I got a couple of bags last fall, so I have them ready to go. But I'm going to add about 1/3 compost and a little bit of biochar, which he also gives you, with the soil. So 1/3 compost and 2/3 of the soil that came from the hole to replace it. And I'm hoping that this will give that seedling a little bit more moisture holding capacity around with that compost and biochar right around the root zone. So that's going to be really important for this tree to really have a good success rate. So I'm going to actually use my hands and my feet. I'm not really that picky. And I'm going to, you know, get that stuff worked in there around the root zone. And then I tend to just hold on to the seedling and then just tap it lightly. If you're on really heavy clay, you're not going to want to do that, but my sandy soils, it works pretty well. And to find out if you've really released or connected the roots with the soil, all you have to do is what's called a 2-finger pull, and that's your thumb and your finger. You just hold on someplace on the stem of the tree and try to pull it out. And if it's firm in the ground, it won't move, so you're in good shape. I'm a little bit below that root collar, so I'm going to make sure that soil is. I like to have a little bit of a dip around the tree that kind of, again, funnels and maybe a little bit more moisture if you can. And then I've got some really nice mulch. And this is just a combination of wood chips, bark, pine needles. But I'm going to spread that mulch not right up to the stem of the tree because you don't want to encourage bugs to visit your tree. But you're going to want to cover that area that you just cleared with about 1 inch or 2 inches of organic compostable material that's going to help keep the soil temperature cooler during the summer months. It's going to help retain moisture in that critical root zone area, and most importantly, probably it's going to deter the vegetation that you just scalped away from growing back right into that area. So once I've planted the tree properly and put the mulch in, I really want to make sure I've got some good water. You know, spring we don't always get it, so hopefully you've got a good water source. And I'm going to water my seedling, newly planted seedling, until it kind of starts to puddle. On our sandy soils, I like to see about 2 inches of water, and how do you gauge that? But when I start to put some water on it and it starts not to kind of go right down, starts to puddle a little bit, I feel pretty good that I'm getting that water down in there. Once again, I'm going to try to get rid of some of those air pockets that I left by mistake, didn't quite get out, so that water helps connect the roots right next to the soil structure. And I feel pretty good. The other thing you may want to remember is that you want the tree to be green side up and vertical, and that gets really hard after you've done a lot of trees in a day. But if the tree has started its life on an angle, it's just going to continue to want to go that direction. So making sure the tree is vertical is really important as you try to place that tree correctly in the ground to give it the most success. Over here I've got another hole, and I thought I would show you, if you don't have a dibble or a flat shovel, you can just use a regular shovel, but you're going to want to dig a little bit of a hole. I did this because this is my service berry. I mean, it's huge. This is actually a 2-year-old seedling that I had in a temporary bed, and I wanted to transplant it after it had a year kind of growing in near my compost pile. But again, it's got a lot of nice pterosorb on it. I've dug the hole, I've scalped the area, I've dug a hole. Again, I've measured the distance. These root systems, not too much more than my shovel, and that's the depth of my hole. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this in my hole, and this is where a friend really helps out a lot. But you're gonna wanna put the soil back from the hole that you got it out, plus mix with a little bit of my biochar. So I'm just gonna take some biochar, and again, I'm looking for 1/3 biochar and compost, and 2/3 original soil that came from the hole, and kind of mix it up, and I'm feeding that back into the hole. And I'm gonna do some just like this, but then I'm gonna reach down and really get the roots around there. Again, I'm going to double check where that root collar area is, and it's usually a swelling, and I'm going to come up just a little bit, and again, that's pulling it up a little bit, helps the roots kind of go down and face the direction I want them to grow for the rest of their life. And I'm going to return the soil and kind of use my fingers to kind of figure out that I'm getting good contact with the soil with the root system, and getting rid of some of those air pockets. I really want people to take their time with each seedling versus, throwing 100 in really quickly. But take your time on each tree. Think about that new beginning in its new permanent site and how you want that to be the best start possible for the money that you've invested and the time. Again, this is a really tall tree. I want to make sure it's as straight as possible. And I'm going to just do a little light tapping with my foot, not really hard, but just kind of get a good feel. It's a little bit depressed, which is going to, again, funnel some little bit of water in. I'm going to do that 2-finger pull, and oh, that's really, really nice. And I have my compost, or my organic mulch, and I'm going to put that around the tree, but not touching the stem of the tree, about 1 inch or 2 inch. And give that tree just the best start it can possibly be. Well, I hope this video was helpful for you. Videoing all by myself out in the woods has been a little bit of a challenge, but hopefully I covered most of the bases. And if you ever have any questions, the Conservation District staff, we're here to help you. Happy planting!